In today's video, we're going to talk about how to knit in the round. How do we go from flat knitting, like you see here, to making a project like a hat that is 9 times out of 10 knit in the round. To go from flat knitting and straight needles to making something in the round, we need a special tool. And that tool is called circular needles. Circular needles are like any other knitting needles, except that they're joined by the cord. And cords vary from brand to brand, but the size of the needle is going to be exactly the same as that of your regular straight knitting needle. So these are both size 13s, so you can see that the needle itself is the same. The difference is the circular needle is a little bit shorter and it's joined by that 16-inch cable. Having your knitting needles joined by the cable allows you to knit around and around and around in a circle, creating the long tube, which is what we're going for when we knit in the round. And even though they look quite a bit different, there are many similarities. Right now we're going to cast on stitches. I'm using the long tail cast on method in this video. I will link to another video I have on how to do that method if you are unclear on it. But as you can see here, the method is exactly the same. We're casting on stitches just like we would any other knitting needle. I want you to notice that as I cast on more and more stitches, they are moving from being just on the needle portion and onto the cable portion, and that is perfectly normal. And you can see that they're kind of loose on the cable, then that's also normal. The size of the stitches are determined by the needle size that you're using. So don't freak out that your stitches are going to look kind of big and loose as they sit on the cable. That is completely normal. In fact, if they're tight on the cable, you're not going to be able to knit them when it comes to the needle. So just make your stitches like you normally would. And remember, when we're making our stitches, we're looking for snug, not strangling. We don't want to strangle our stitches. We just want them to be snug and secure. Okay, we have our stitches cast on, and we are going to just take a moment and make sure that nothing is twisted. And so we're going to very carefully examine the way the stitches are laying on the needle. When I turn the knitting over, you can see how this looks differently. You can actually see those purl bumps. And so that tells you which is going to be your right side and wrong side in the knitting. And you want to make sure that all of those purl bumps are facing the same way. So to join in the round, we're going to make sure that our working yarn is on the right. The right needle is going to be our working needle. We want the working yarn on the right side. The first thing we're going to do to join is to slip the stitch from the right needle over to the left needle and knit those two together. and make sure you're using the working yarn and not the tail. If you don't do this knit two together, your yarn or your project is really not securely joined. So don't miss that step. And now we're just going to knit around and around like any other knitting project. As you can see, I'm simply knitting every stitch. What you're going to do is you're going to slide those stitches around. It's a little bit fiddly on the first row. The first row of knitting is always the most challenging row to get through. If you can make it through your first couple of rows, you are well on the way with your project. So we're just going to knit until we come back to the tail, and that is the end of our first round. Okay, we're back to where the tail is sitting. That's how we know that we've completed the round. That stitch will look a little bit different. As you knit along, it will be less and less noticeable. But we want to keep track of where we joined the yarn because that signifies the start of a new round. And the best way to keep track of when we begin a new round is to use a stitch marker. And you can purchase all kinds of stitch markers. There are dozens and dozens of fun things available, or you can simply make your own with a contrasting color of yarn. I took this little piece of yarn and just tied it into a little circle, and that's how I know when I'm on my next round. And all you're going to do is when you get to that marker is slip it over and just keep knitting in whatever the pattern says to do. In this case, we're doing a sample and we're just knitting every stitch. So we're going to continue now in our round 2, and everything is a knit stitch. Okay, I finished my round 2. I'm approaching that stitch marker and watch what I do. That's it. I literally slip it from one needle to the next. The purpose of the stitch marker is to serve as a visual cue. That's all it is. It visually reminds you that, okay, you finished this round. Now we're on to the next round, which is round 3. And notice how I'm knitting every stitch and it's giving me this beautiful, perfect stockinette pattern. So now we're into round 3, and I'm going to knit. Let's look at how to add in some purl stitches. So you can see I started purling, and now I'm going to go back to knit. So there we've got 3 purl stitches on the right side of our fabric. And let's say, oh, no, I didn't really want that. I'm just going to pull that out. I'm going to tink it out. And the stitch was not seated correctly. So I manually turned it and put it the correct way on the needle, and I'm continuing on. I decided to tink back 2 stitches and get rid of those purls and decide to knit instead. And now I'm going to purl. I know I'm throwing a lot at you at one time. Nobody lose your mind. Just know that this is something you can do. We will look at that in more detail later. I just want you to see that it's possible to make a mistake with a couple of stitches and easily take them out and reknit them the way you want them. But right now we're going to just continue and knit 2, purl 2 in this knit in the round sample. Just think of this as like a gigantic swatch. That's all we're doing. We're just practicing stitches. And so now I'm knitting. And now I'm going to do a purl 2. And it's exactly the same as any other knitting project. You're just bringing the yarn in front and doing your purl stitches. And then we're going to take the yarn to the back and complete the knit stitches. It's basically the same procedure as if we were on the straight needles that you are so accustomed to using. And now we're coming to the end of this particular round. We know that because we can see that bright yellow stitch marker. And so we're going to just, in this case, knit right up to the stitch marker, and here we go. We're going to slip it over. When you hear slip marker, that's what it means. You slip the marker over. And now our sample, we can see the introduction of the purl stitches with all of that stockinette. And isn't that pretty? And we have this nice, lovely tube of knitting. And, we could do all sorts of things with it.